Wrong door, right storm. You ever watch a storm walk into a room wearing heels and a badge? That's exactly what it looked like when Cameron Bell stepped into the Travis County Courthouse. Everybody noticed, but not everybody understood, yet. Cam wasn't just any officer. She was the youngest black woman ever promoted to internal oversight in Austin PD. And if the badge didn't make people flinch, her eyes did. That morning, she was supposed to quietly observe a probation hearing for a low-level drug case. Routine, boring, filler docket stuff. But what she walked into was anything but. The defendant was barely 21, skin still held that early adulthood glow, and his file read more like a high school detention log than a criminal record. But across from him sat ADA Lucas Trent. White, 37, always looked like he'd just walked out of a catalog shoot for mediocre justice. He had that condescending smirk, loaded and ready. Same one Cam had seen too many times, on too many faces that thought authority meant above the rules. The courtroom was half full, mostly bored clerks, a couple public defenders half asleep, and two cops in the back who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But then one of them said something low, something slick, something stupid, loud enough for Cam to hear, but not the judge. "You believe they gave her a badge? Shit must be a diversity hire." She didn't turn, not yet. Judge Mirren was old school, nearly 70, known for being sharp, but not known for being fair. The kind of judge who used clean cut like a metric for innocence and called hoodies a red flag. As the defense attorney tried to argue the kid's charges were exaggerated, one joint, one text, and somehow they'd stitched it into intent to distribute, Mirren cut him off mid-sentence. Cameron raised her brow but stayed seated, pulling the case file onto her lap. The arresting officers? Officers Grant and Diggs. Yep, same two sitting behind her making locker room jokes and thinking nobody was listening. What they didn't know, she'd already reviewed their body cam footage. What they didn't know, she already knew they doctored the audio timestamps. And right when the judge was about to deny bail, the younger cop, Diggs, stood up and walked to the bench, unprompted, trying to clarify a few details. Cam knew that move: distract, reframe, reinforce. Only he miscalculated. When Judge Mirren paused, squinting at the officer like he was a half-forgotten errand, Diggs leaned in and muttered something with way too much familiarity. Cameron stood. No announcement, no warning, just rose from her seat with the kind of posture that made everyone sit straighter. "Your Honor," she said, voice level but firm, "I need to request a halt to this proceeding under Section 103.4 of Procedural Audit Protocol." Mirren blinked. "You what?" And that's when everything tilted. "I have evidence that this arrest was manufactured," Cam said, dropping a flash drive on the clerk's desk like it was dynamite. "Audio tampered, chain of custody violated, defendant's rights ignored." Ada Trent stood so fast, his chair skidded backward, eyes darting like rats in a spotlight. "You can't be serious," he stammered. But Cam just locked eyes with him. "Oh, I'm not serious," she said. "I'm surgical." The judge tried to regain control, but the courtroom was already in slow collapse. Diggs looked like he wanted to disappear, and Grant, gone pale, ghost-like. Cam walked to the center like she owned the floor. She didn't need backup. She was the backup. And for the first time in that courtroom, silence didn't belong to the powerful. It belonged to the caught. They thought a cage would quiet him. What they forgot is that some minds get sharper under pressure, and Darius Kelton's was a damn scalpel. From the jump, he wasn't like the others on the block. No shade to the other guys. Some were fighters, some were survivors, but Darius, he was a tactician. While most inmates sized each other up by muscle or reputation, Darius was clocking reading habits, asking who had library access, and making friends with the dude who ran the printer in the law library. His bunk barely had room for his frame, But somehow it housed 6 law journals, 3 highlighters, and a battered legal dictionary he damn near slept with. Within a week of arriving, he'd drafted his own appeal. Not some generic "I didn't do it" rant either. Nah, this thing cited statutes, broke down prosecutorial misconduct, and referenced a 2011 appeals court ruling so obscure the prison librarian thought he was joking. 10 days in, the paperwork was filed. By week 3, he'd already spotted inconsistencies in his cellmate's case and helped him build a new motion. The dude walked out 6 months later. Word got around fast. "That new guy?" someone whispered in the yard. "Professor D, he ain't in here for nothing. He's in here doing something." Even the guards started treating him different. Not nicer, just more careful. One slipped and called him Professor Kelton during roll call. Another guard, after watching him scribble in his notebook for hours, muttered, "You planning to sue all of us or just the ones who piss you off?" Darius just smiled and said, "Ask your supervisor." That shut him up. By month 2, Darius had unofficial office hours. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, his bunk turned into a consultation room. Inmates lined up with questions about sentencing charts, appeals, even divorce filings. And he never charged. "They already paid," he'd say, tapping the bars. Late one night, a parole officer who'd been eyeing him warily for weeks finally cracked. Caught him alone in the rec area, studying a fresh Supreme Court opinion printed from a smuggled laptop connection. "You actually understand that?" she asked, deadpan. Darius didn't look up. "Kennedy v. Louisiana? You mean the part where they sidestep precedent to limit capital punishment against non-homicidal offenders?" She blinked. "Damn." "Yeah," he said. "You'd be amazed what you can memorize when no one gives you a TV." Word got out. Not just in the yard or the mess hall, but beyond the walls. Some public defenders started quoting his handwritten briefs. A local journalist wrote a blog post about a mystery legal mind filing stronger motions from prison than half the bar exam passers downtown. His old professor at Howard Law sent him a letter that read, "We always said you were dangerous, but now they're the ones afraid." And Judge Crane? Yeah, he heard too. The same man who waved off Darius like he was a name on a docket sheet now had his name popping up on legal boards tagged with phrases like "wrongfully incarcerated genius" and "strategic incarceration backlash." A quiet panic started brewing behind closed doors. Because if Darius kept doing what he was doing, someone out there was going to have to answer for locking up a man who could run legal circles around their best clerks. Inside the prison, though, Darius wasn't looking for clout. He was building something, not for revenge. Judge Halford Crane was halfway through a rubber chicken entree at some bougie Charleston fundraiser when the whispers started swirling around his table like smoke. "Did you hear? That Kelton kid? Yeah, the one from the fraud case. Filed a writ that's actually picking up traction. He's challenging old convictions. Yours." Crane smiled like he didn't hear a thing, but his grip on the fork tightened. Real tight. He tried to laugh it off. "These jailhouse lawyers think they can redefine justice because they read a few casebooks," he muttered. But his face didn't match the tone. Not anymore. Then a server, in a pressed vest and tight smile, tapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Sir, someone from the clerk's office dropped this for you." Said it was urgent. Crane took the envelope with a scoff, slid a finger under the flap, and pulled out the letter. First line, "Formal notice of federal review, docket number 07412C. His smile cracked. He folded the letter fast, stuffed it into his coat pocket like it burned, and excused himself from the table. The hallway outside the ballroom smelled like lemon wax and panic. He leaned against the marble wall and read the whole damn thing. It wasn't just Kelton's case. It was Lewis, Jenkins, Martin. 3 black defendants, all sentenced under Crane, all currently under independent review. He went home early that night, blamed a stomach bug to save face. But back in his wood-paneled study, with his brandy glass trembling in his hand, he opened his laptop and started reading. One by one, he pulled up the filings, every single, 1. Signed, Kelton Darius. The writing wasn't just competent. It was a surgical takedown in motion. And Crane recognized the style. The same type of logic-driven language he'd dismissed once in his courtroom as too academic when Darius stood trial. He remembered rolling his eyes at the defense's closing argument. What he didn't know then was that Darius had ghostwritten that entire closing. Now, that same firepower was being aimed right at the cracks in Crane's record. And Darius, he wasn't just exposing procedural slips. He was drawing blood, highlighting patterns, weaving timelines, showing how black defendants in Crane's court were more likely to get denied bail. Longer sentences, harsher language and rulings. It wasn't enough to say racist judge. Darius was proving it, line by line. Worse, each filing was cleaner than the last, sharper, less angry, more lethal. Like Darius had traded rage for precision and was using it like a blade. By the time Crane reached the 5th case file, his stomach finally caught up with his nerves. He rushed to the sink and vomited, brandy, bile, and fear, all mixed into one expensive mess. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he called an old friend, a federal appeals judge he used to play golf with. "Off the record," Crane asked, voice tight, "what happens if a defendant proves a pattern of biased sentencing?" The pause on the other end of the line was long, cold. "Then they don't just unseat you," his friend finally said. "They unmake you." Crane stared at his bookshelf, at the awards, the plaques, the law degree that hadn't protected him from a kid he thought was disposable. He'd sentenced Darius Kelton to 10 years, and Darius just gave him a life sentence of sleepless nights. It started with a tweet. Ain't that always the way? Some intern at Channel 9 posted a late-night clip titled, "From Convict to Legal Crusader. Meet the man suing the judge who locked him up." A blurry photo of Darius behind glass, head bowed, and then, bam, it blew the hell up. By sunrise, it was top of the feed, writing hashtags like a stolen wave. #Kelton vs. Crane, #Justice Inside Out, and the banger, #Reckoning in Robes. And just like that, the world knew. The story hit local news first, but it didn't stay local. Darius Kelton, black, 26, formerly a nobody in the system, was now a name whispered in law school halls and shouted across courtroom steps. The headline was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. Prisoner files appeals that threaten to overturn dozens of convictions by Charleston judge. Crane saw it while eating dry toast in his study, the crust turning to dust in his mouth. The newscaster's voice was chipper in that morning death kind of way. Several of the cases Kelton has challenged show a pattern of judicial misconduct, particularly against black defendants. He changed the channel. Didn't help, it was everywhere. By noon, the ACLU slid in with a flex. Amicus brief filed on Kelton's behalf, citing gross misuse of judicial discretion and racial bias in sentencing patterns. Crane's inbox flooded, not with support, but with questions. Colleagues he'd played golf with, judges he'd mentored, lawyers who'd once kissed the ring, suddenly ghost, cold, distant. Nobody wanted to stand next to a burning man. Then came her, Jade Winslow. The reporter no one took seriously until she dropped the interview that made Darius a damn movement. She was barely 24, freelanced for a progressive outlet, and somehow got clearance for a sit-down at the prison. Everyone expected soft questions, fluff. Instead, she asked the kind of questions that made the air thicken, even through the screen. "Why now?" she said. "Why not just fight for your own freedom and walk away?" Darius looked dead into the camera and said, "Because my freedom is the smallest part of this." She blinked. He leaned forward. "They thought locking me away would end my story. But I've been building a blueprint. This isn't about one judge. This is about every courtroom that forgets the law is supposed to protect, not crush. I'm not dismantling a man. I'm dismantling a machine." Jade tried to keep her cool. But you could see it. She knew she was witnessing something seismic. Then he dropped the line that cracked open the internet like a grenade in a mailbox. He thought I was just another defendant. Turns out I was his reckoning. Crane watched the clip in his office. Door shut. Lights off. The glare of the laptop screen was the only thing lighting the room, and it made him look haunted. Ghostly. Small. Because it wasn't just the words. It was the calm, the clarity, the control. Darius looked more like a judge than he ever had. And Crane? He looked like a man waiting for a knock on the door that was absolutely coming. Within 48 hours, protesters lined the courthouse steps. Law students wore shirts with Darius's face, like he was Mandela. A grassroots legal fund popped up called the Kelton Project. Donations hit 6 figures in a day. And back inside that prison, Darius sat at his tiny desk, drafting motion after motion. Not just for himself, but for every name he remembered hearing in a courtroom. Every black kid who got buried under a system built to forget them. The camera caught the moment the tables flipped. But what it didn't catch was the fact that Darius hadn't just flipped them. He was building something new on top of the rubble. They called it a hearing, but it felt more like a reckoning on live broadcast. The federal appeals courtroom was standing room only, the air thick with tension, and the buzz of cameras tucked behind legal observers trying to play it cool. Outside, protesters filled the square with signs and chants. But inside? Inside, the room felt like the universe had hit pause to listen. At the center of it all, 2 men, 2 legacies, 1 screen, 1 bench. Judge Halford Crane sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped so tightly the blood had stopped flowing. He tried every trick in the old white man playbook to get out of this moment. Filed for recusal, denied. Pleaded conflict of interest, denied. Tried to claim emotional trauma. Boy, please. The appellate board had made it crystal clear. You sentenced this man. You'll hear him now. Then, the screen flickered on, and there he was. Darius Kelton, wearing prison khakis, seated at a cheap metal table, fluorescent lights buzzing above him. But he looked like the freest man in the room. His posture? Straight. His voice? Smooth, calm, like a scalpel in warm water. He didn't posture. He didn't beg. He just laid it all out. The record shows I was convicted based on circumstantial evidence, unsupported allegations, and a prosecution that failed to meet its burden. He glanced once at the camera, then back at the documents. But what the record doesn't say, and what I'm here to make known, is that the bias wasn't accidental. It was structural. I was convicted because I didn't look like someone this courtroom could imagine writing law. Because Judge Crane looked at me and saw an archetype, not a mind. A ripple moved through the gallery like wind in dry grass. Darius didn't blink. My public defender at the time was under-resourced. My emotions were ignored. My right to a fair trial was not just compromised, it was sold out for speed and assumption. He paused. And I've spent every day since proving that assumption wrong. Crane cleared his throat. His own rebuttal began with a flurry of citations, mostly outdated, mostly irrelevant. He fumbled a name, misquoted a ruling, tried to explain judicial discretion like it was a force of nature instead of a weapon he'd wielded carelessly. The panel of appellate judges didn't interrupt. They just watched, listened. Not just to the words, but to the tone. One judge leaned forward, pen still. Another had their fingers steepled, eyes unreadable. And Crane? Crane was unraveling. Not all at once, but in phrase. Like a suit that still looks nice from afar, but up close is one thread from falling apart. The moment Darius said, "If I had been white, with my record, with my education, I would have been called ambitious, not dangerous." The room dropped into full silence. And that silence wasn't empty. It was loud. By the end of his statement, no one had looked at Crane for 10 full minutes. They were looking at Darius, at what he represented, at the crack in the foundation he had become. Crane stood to deliver his closing, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded like a man trying to argue with gravity. The hearing ended. The board recessed. But everybody already knew. Whatever came next. Darius had already won. The system wasn't built to listen to people like him. But now, it had no choice. And maybe, just maybe, it was about to remember everyone it left behind. The doors slid open like a movie scene, and boom, the world exploded. Darius Kelton stepped into sunlight with a paper bag in one hand, a fresh button-down over prison-creased slacks, and a face carved from steel in peace. The crowd roared. Fists shot into the air. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Reporters screamed his name, and he didn't flinch, not once. Because this wasn't just his exit, it was a damn entrance. His conviction? Overturned. The appellate court's ruling had dropped that morning, and it hit harder than any headline. Due process violations, prosecutorial misconduct, and systemic bias undermined the legitimacy of Mr. Kelton's conviction. Translation: y'all messed up, big time. The court not only cleared his name, they shredded the ruling Crane had built his reputation on. One judge even wrote in their concurrence, Mr. Kelton's legal insight reveals a clarity of mind unmatched by many who wear the robe. That was polite legal code for he smoked y'all in your own house. So when Darius walked out those prison gates, he didn't strut. He marched. There was no anger in his step, just intention. Like every footfall was part of a larger plan he'd already sketched out in ink and fire. Someone tried to shove a mic in his face. He raised a hand not to silence, but to hold space. I didn't walk out today to celebrate a mistake corrected, he said, voice cutting through the noise. I walked out to start correcting the system that made it. No applause line, just truth. And people felt that. Within 48 hours, Darius filed a formal motion, a request for judicial review of every conviction presided over by Judge Halford Crane, with an emphasis on racial disparities and due process violations. The motion was clean, aggressive, backed by case law and community support. 2 weeks later, Crane quietly retired. No press release, no portrait unveiling. Just a footnote buried in a state memo. A name crossed off a roster. No courtroom bearing his name. No scholarship fund in his honor. Just a man slipping out of relevance, chased by the shadow of the man he tried to bury. But Darius built something. With public donations flooding in, he launched the Unshackled Project, a nonprofit legal collective dedicated to challenging wrongful convictions, advocating for incarcerated legal minds, and teaching young public defenders how to fight like their clients' lives depended on it. Because they do. The first office was a renovated shipping container outside a community center. Second one came a month later, in D.C. Third is planned for Atlanta. And the team? All former inmates, law students of color, and attorneys tired of pretending the system was neutral. Darius didn't have time for champagne or revenge tours. He had case files to read, workshops to run, minds to sharpen. When asked if he forgave Crane, he paused only a second. Forgiveness ain't the point, he said. He tried to erase me. But I wasn't ink, I was the pen. He never said, I told you so. He just built proof that brilliance, no matter how deep they try to bury it, will rise. And when it does, it doesn't whisper. It redefines justice.